The following podcast is taken from a live broadcast on Inspire FM. Ya hala, ya hala, ya hala, ya hala, ya hala, ya hala.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to Sister Speak with me, Louisa.
And me, Mariam. Welcome back, Louisa.
Thank you. It's been a very long time and I'm a bit,
No, guys, show her some love. She's amazing.
A bit nervous. People are probably like, who even is she?
No, we're glad to have her back.
Thank you. We're Sister Speak. Thank you for joining us. And Mariam, would you like to say what our show's about?
So our show is a platform for Muslim girls to voice their own opinions on current events and issues, and even form discussions on general topics such as religion, culture and politics and social media. We want to note that all opinions and views are our own, and we respect all other or opposing views.
Yeah. So today our main topic is going to be on Islamophobia in the workplace, and that's quite a big topic, I'd say, right?
Yeah.
We do luckily have a few guests on who will hopefully be joining us soon. Before we go into that, would you like to quickly say a thought of the week?
So I thought the week before that, thought of the week is a segment on our show that is something that we share, something that inspired us, something beneficial, and something maybe we've just been thinking about. I'll keep my thought of the week short because we're going to have some guests on our show. My thought of the week is just keep working hard.
Mm-hmm.
Keep working hard, but work smart. I think there's a line between working hard and working smart, and I think for me personally, I've been always a hard worker. I really like to work hard. I really like to work towards my goals, but I realized that you don't have to put something that you could do in 20%.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you go 80%? So for example, say you have an exam and you have a specific topic. Why would you revise all the other topics that are not going to come in?
Yeah.
Rather than just focusing and going on depth, that 20%. So in that sense, I think this year I really want to focus on building strategies to work effectively.
Pretty solid thought of the week, I'd say. Yeah, I think we can all live by that. So I'll skip over mine. I don't, to be honest, yeah. So we are going to be joined by a guest right now. Her name is Naz Shah. She's a Member of Parliament for Bradford West, the Labour Shadow Minister for Women and Equalities, and the Vice Chair All-Party Parliamentary Group. So, Assalamu alaikum, Naz. How are you doing?
Pleasure to have you.
Yeah. Thank you for coming. Today our topic is on Islamophobia in the workplace, which is quite a broad topic, I'd say. I guess first things first that we'd like to talk about is basically what is Islamophobia, because it's quite blurry, I guess, in that sense. So maybe personally to you, what is Islamophobia?
So it's a timely question actually. Mm-hmm. So we've just but since November launched a definition on Islamophobia for these. So I'm a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group, and we launched the definition in November after a long consultation. And so the definition is Islamophobia is rooted in racism, is a type of racism, and the word is attacks Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. I don't know what that means. I keep forgetting that middle word. But basically, it's talking about it's rooted in racism.
Mm-hmm.
The reason we say it's rooted in racism is simply because if we look at discrimination, so we look at workplace discrimination, and the fact that the Women in Select Committee's report highlighted that if you wear a hijab, you're 85% less likely to get a job. If you have a Muslim-sounding name, we know racism to be discrimination.
Mm.
So this Islamophobia is what's happening to Muslims right now. Is being otherized. So you're less likely to get a job. You're less likely, you're talked about in the media all the time. You've got false stuff out there. That's what we understand to be racism. So Islamophobia is a type of racism.
Okay.
Further to that, when we talk about Muslimness, what we mean really is, and perceived Muslimness, is Islamophobic attacks don't just happen on Muslims, because we've had in America a Sikh guy was killed outside Parliament, a guest who, turban wearing Sikh, he had his turban pulled off. We've had research which has shown that men who wear beards, regardless of their faith, have been attacked because they're perceived to be Muslim. The truth is, when a victim is, any victim who is subject to an Islamophobic attack and they experience that, then nobody's ever stopped them and asked them what their theological beliefs are or whether they're actually a Muslim. It's about them being perceived to be a Muslim.
Perceived as Muslim or based off their appearance.
So it's not just about... because Islamophobia doesn't just happen to Muslims.
Yeah.
And we've got to accept that Islamophobia happens to people who are non-Muslim, and who are perceived to be Muslim.
Yeah.
Or their Muslimness. So even if you're doing anything, so for example, if you're supporting, if you look on Twitter and you're supporting something that is in support of Muslims, then you get lots and lots of Islamophobia and stuff on your Twitter feed or your Facebook page. So that's what we're saying. So that's my understanding of Islamophobia.
Yeah.
And Islamophobia takes all guises and shapes, whether it's the overt racism, which is if you look at Twitter and you kind of, you get the overt references to religion, continuously being attacked, our Prophet peace be upon him, that kind of language that is used, that your Prophet is this, you belong to a religion that does this, you belong to all of that kind of stuff. And then there's the overt things which are, well, if you wear a hijab, you might not get a job, or if you wear a beard, you're less likely to get interviewed, or you have a Muslim-sounding name, you might not get a job interview.
So I guess in that sense, it's very broad, but at the same time, it's really deep. It's like rooted in so many different aspects, and it can occur from so many different angles. Mariam, what about?
Yeah, I was just going to ask the whole point of Muslim perceived. You talked about being Muslim and then people perceiving other people to be Muslim and them being attacked for that purpose. And I just want to ask, how would you describe racism? Because it's such a big umbrella term, and I feel like it's really hard to identify when you're being thrown with racist comments.
Okay, so there's two things. So Muslims can be if you happen to be of a colour. So if you happen to be black, or if you happen to be so if you happen to be brown, if you happen to be non-white, people of colour. So you have. What happens is you can have a double whammy. So you can have racism, which is overt racism, which is you're black or Asian. And then you have, if you're wearing a hijab, you can have Islam. So it can be racism is racism. And then you can also, so Islamophobia is rooted in racism. It's a type of racism. So if you've got the hijab, for example, if a girl is walking along and she has a hijab pulled off, it's because she's viewed to be a Muslim. She's perceived as Muslim. And that's what happened. And that can take any shape of, it can be taken in any way. It's about how the person who's impacted upon and how they feel. Why were they attacked? Was it because they were black? Was it because they were Muslim? If they were visibly Muslim,
Yeah, I have a question for you. So say, for example, you are at an interview and you get rejected. Or how do we perceive and how do we know and identify whether we have been attacked because of Islamophobia, and how do we identify it?
Because the line's quite blurred, it's difficult to exactly pinpoint what becomes Islamophobia.
Because to my understanding, there'll be covert Islamophobic comments or attacks. So how I'm not sure whether there's laws to protect.
So if we look at employment law, so we already have equality law.
Yeah.
So in the case of you were going to go for a job and you did not make the shortlist, and you feel that you were qualified and you were more than qualified for the job, then you would ask for feedback. Then you could ask for how many people were of a particular race, and if you had if you were treated differently. The act of discrimination, we're already protected. Religion is a characteristic that is protected under equality law. In any case, when we're talking about Islamophobia is much more, or right now, is the otherization of Muslims that has seeped into the workplace, that has seeped into, way past the dining table, like Baroness Warsi's infamous speech in 2011. So you can use the equality legislation to ask the question, because if you don't get shortlisted, you can literally ask, why didn't I get shortlisted? You want feedback. You can then ask the question, well, how many people did get shortlisted? And then if you've got so many people shortlisted and you weren't shortlisted and they were less qualified, then you can ask for that information without identifying, because firms, especially the public sector, are obliged to give you that information. Where, if you feel that you've been discriminated against, you can raise the question.
And does that apply to the private sector as well?
In terms of the private sector, religion is covered. It is absolutely covered. And race is covered. And it would be, there hasn't been a case that I'm aware of yet, but I don't see why you couldn't.
I think that's
But this definition is not a legal framework. So in that case, so in the case of a legal issue, you would revert back to the equalities legislation. This is about the framework that we've done. The APPG definition is about giving the whole concept of Islamophobia a deeper understanding, to understand that this actually does exist in society and we need to address it.
Because I think that was going to lead on to my next question. How important is it actually to have a definition of Islamophobia that, Muslims in general agree with, and then to push that forth and that people can actually stand by? So how important is it that this definition sort of gets passed through?
Extremely important. So this definition, it's not about being passed through. What this definition is, it's not a legal law that we're passing.
Yeah,
we already have
or accepted in general, I guess.
So accepted and adopted. What we want it to be is adopted by the current. We want it adopted by the current Conservative Party. I'm really pleased to say, this definition has the broadest. Absolute broadest support from the Muslim community, from the mainstream Muslim community, over 80 academics, over 800 organisations, and we have, the APPG affords that credibility of, this definition coming from the community, and it's been consulted on widely from people across up and down the globe, up and down the country, and it's important because the Labour Party has taken a stance and adopted it. I've met with unions just this afternoon, or this morning rather, to talk about the definition, to talk about them potentially adopting it. I've been talking to the universities to adopt it, because by adopting it, what we're saying is that yes, we acknowledge it exists, but B, more importantly, we'd like to understand how it manifests. And so those examples in the definition are really important to read, so we can then deal with it. Because we've got a problem, but we need to understand. First step is in acknowledging we have a problem, which, just over a year ago, the minister in the Conservative Party didn't even think we needed a definition. Now we've got to a position where they accept we need a definition.
That's brilliant.
We just don't accept the definition that's come from the actual Muslim community, which is an absolute shame.
How would you encourage Muslims to report Islamophobic attacks or
to sort of overcome Islamophobia perhaps that they've faced?
Okay, so in terms of reporting, there's the IRU, the Islamophobia Response Unit, which is reporting unit, which is led by MEND. It's one of MEND's arm, Muslim Engagement and Development Network. They really, really do a lot of work on this issue. That's one of the ways. But there is the other way, which is directly reporting it to the police as a hate crime and getting the police to take it seriously. Because in Luton, you come under Bedfordshire Police.
Yeah.
And Bedfordshire Police is led by, the Chief Constable is John Boucher. And I personally know him because I work with him on the National Roundtable for Policing and Race and Religion. So he's very, very committed to this agenda. So you've got your police force that you need to be reporting it to. You can report it through if people don't feel confident going direct to the police, they can use, local advocates, which, you can find through the IRU.
Mm.
And I haven't got the website to hand, but if people Google MEND, IRU, the Islamophobic Reporting Unit, they can get all the information from there.
Sure. So you talk about reporting it to the police, but my question is, when you report it to the police, what happens next? Because a lot of people might have fears and hesitation to report it to police as they don't know what will happen next. So could you just shed some light on that?
It depends on the nature of the attack. It depends on the nature of. So if you have an Islamophobic attack, which is, really, really clearly, as somebody been, like the video that we saw on Channel 4, where a girl was going about her business, walking down toward the tube, a guy just walked past and literally kicked her, and she fell down. Really, really kicked her in the back, very deliberately. Wow. She fell down. I think she broke a leg or something, or an arm. That was an Islamophobic attack, an unprovoked attack, and that was really, really straightforward. It was so straightforward. It was a grievous bodily harm or whatever it was that he got charged with. There was nothing. It really, really does depend on the nature of what you're reporting. Because obviously there's the Islamophobic attacks, but there's also understanding Islamophobia in the context of the workplace, in the context of our daily lives of not being able to get a job, or we took evidence, and we had a chap whose wife had got him an insurance quote, and she'd put in his nickname, and they asked him he said, I better get my real full name in, and when he put his full name in, which was a Muslim name, his premium went up by 400. That was real evidence that we took during this inquiry. So you've got to understand that actually it's not just about the overt and stuff that you feel, but it's actually when you're putting your name into a computer, and that is worrying because that is structural. And there are things about, structural racism. It's no different to how black people were treated many, many years ago. Right now, the uprising, we had in this country, we have a history where, at one point it was the Irish, then it was the blacks, now it's the Muslims. Muslims are the new blacks.
But that's quite scary, isn't it? If you put it into, if it's being programmed in a way, that if you have a Muslim name, your fee goes up or things like that. So I guess in that sense, it is more important that a definition for Islamophobia be established as quick as possible. Right?
And I think what we should do is take the onus and try to learn what the definition is, and people like you that are promoting this and telling us where to go to protect ourselves and know our rights.
Absolutely, we've got to look. Men do some amazing work in the community of raising people's training and awareness around Islamophobia. I'm sure you'd have somebody in Luton, and if not, reach out to the organisation. I'm sure they'd be happy to host something in Luton should you need it. I think it's important that we recognise Islamophobia for what it is. It is a hatred. There's no room for it in society, and we need to root it out. And the unfortunate thing is that we have a political party in government, who I feel which is absolutely institutionally Islamophobic, and that doesn't help because if you have somebody who's potentially going to be our next prime minister and calls them Asian women in niqabs, burqas, and burqas, letterboxes and bank robbers, and that kind of language, then I'm afraid I'm not optimistic. Which is why we have to do as much as we can in terms of raising awareness, etc.
Right. Well, Naz Shah, thank you very much for joining us today and giving the information that you did, because I'm sure loads of people out there didn't know that so many lines are available had they experienced, Islamophobia. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us.
If you look at Islamophobiadefined.com, and then if you Google the Islamophobia definition, APPG, there's lots and lots of links of who's endorsed it, what it means. There's a brilliant video on there which explains that first question about racism on their Facebook page, about what we understand to racism is and why this is racist.
Sure.
Why it's rooted in racism.
Okay,
thank you, Naz Shah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Okay, so that was Naz Shah, and I think she shed a lot of light on the discussion in the sense that Islamophobia can be woven into society in so many different ways, and that actually there's so many different paths that you can take. In essence, have you experience or should you experience Islamophobia?
I think one thing she shed light on was the idea of being Muslim and perceived, and when people are perceived as Muslim, I mean, that's something that I didn't really consider. So, that was really helpful. Thank you, Naz Shah.
Yeah, okay, so our next guest who's on the line right now is Dr. Katwar Najib. And yeah, she is a visiting researcher at Newcastle University from 2016 to 2018, and a lead researcher of the SAMA project, which stands for Spaces of Anti-Muslim Act in Paris and London. So yeah, thank you for joining us today, Dr. Katwar Najib.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. But yeah, I guess the first question, like we asked Naz, is what does Islamophobia sort of mean to you to start off the discussion?
Islamophobia is discrimination or aggression or verbal abuse that target Muslims or people who are perceived as Muslim. So with this perceived thing, we can understand that it is a form of racism. That's why I totally agree with the APPG definition. So I really hope that in the future it will be accepted at the global scale, and notably in the parliament first.
Yeah, so I guess I'd like to ask really what is the impact of Islamophobia on people who have experienced it in the workplace? What type of effect does it have? Because I guess that's the most important part, is the fact that it usually has a negative effect on the victims.
So I've interviewed 60 victims of Islamophobia in Paris and London. And the victims that I've interviewed were mainly women and veiled Muslim women that were targeted because of markers of Muslimness, so their hijab most of the time. And the impact can be on their spatial mobility, but also on their behaviors. So they started to develop new behaviors, new mobility in order to avert potential situations of Islamophobia. And because I work in France and in the UK, I am able to compare how the victims react. At the moment, I have more analyzed material for France. So in France, the majority of Islamophobic acts happen in public institutions, and they are discrimination. And in the UK, it is different. It is more about abusive behaviors, notably verbal abuses that happen in public areas and public transport. So the victims are more likely to be passers-by and shoppers in the UK, and more students in France, because it's related to the French policy, and notably the 2004 law banning the headscarf in public schools, that can be seen fostering such institutionalized discrimination. But in terms of impact, I've personally noticed that, notably in Paris, that veiled Muslim women avoid central districts, privileged districts, crowded districts, so they prefer to stay in known spaces, notably their neighborhoods. And in terms of behaviors, we have different women, they react in their own way. Some of them decided to appear to constantly show a positive image. So they smile a lot. They appear very sociable in order to reassure the person who stare at them in negatively. There are others who are more combative, and they want to show that they have the right to be Muslim, they have the right to be religious and to wear the hijab, and people have to deal with them and talk with them,
and
others,
respect them.
Yeah, exactly. And others are more discreet. So
Sure.
either they are, it's because they are more less confident, or because they just want protection. They are just scared about the consequences. So some of them start to hide their hijab under their hooded coat, for example. They started to go outside. They be accompanied with relatives or friends. They don't go out alone.
So it really is affecting the way that they, live their everyday life.
There is a real impact on their behaviors.
Yeah. We are coming to the end of our first half, but we'd love to continue talking with you after the break, and we hope that everyone joins us after the break. So yeah, Assalamu alaikum.
You're listening to an Inspire FM podcast, making available our popular programs from our daily broadcast on Inspire FM.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome back to Sister Speak. So before the break we were basically talking about Islamophobia and generally what it is. We should be joined by Dr. Katwar Najib. Just to give you a bit of background information, Dr. Katwar is a researcher at Newcastle University, and she's the lead researcher of the SAMA project, which is Spaces of Anti-Muslim Acts in Paris and London. Dr. Katwar, assalamu alaikum. Are you still there? Technical difficulties.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Me?
Perfect.
Yeah. We're joined by Dr. Katwar. She joined us before the break and we were having quite a deep discussion. I'm going to hand it over to Mariam for the final question.
Yeah, so you talked about how the way it impacts French Muslims, and you talked about how Muslims are expected to perform in a certain way, so they have to exhibit more happier, and they feel they can't go to public spaces. But my question is, because you've researched in England and France and you're able to recognize and distinguish the differences, do you think there's a different perception of how Muslims are received in England and as opposed to France?
Yes, there is Islamophobia is very different in the UK than in France. In the UK, it happens mostly in public areas, while in France it happens in public institutions. So I feel like the phenomenon is more an institutionalized phenomenon in France, based on the 2004 law banning the headscarf in public schools, because this law, in fact, it leads to abusive an abusive interpretation of this law, because there are people who think that they have the right to extend the scope of this law to all the users of public institutions and public services. But it's not the case. It's not for all the users. It's only for young girls who go to high school. But some people use this law in order to put certain domination exacerbated by a false and abusive interpretation of the 2004 law. And even some employers prohibit the wearing of religious signs in their internal regulation, which can be under certain conditions illegal. So for veiled Muslim women to find a job in France, it is very difficult, because they have to,
I can imagine.
They have to cope with first the law and also the abusive interpretation of the law. And because of that, I saw that I've met 33 interviewees in France, and they experienced obviously Islamophobic acts in public institutions, but also at their workplace. And what I can say is that, as a conclusion, that my work is highlighting the fact that the place of Islamophobia, and it is even more obvious when focusing only on workplace, that describe a certain domination. And this the hierarchy that we can find in the social professional and administrative environment can add a certain legitimacy to this type of illegal act. So the perpetrator can feel more comfortable and empowered to act in a certain way.
And more justified in a sense. Yeah.
While in the UK, we don't have this, it's not the same climate. In the UK, there is a lot of law protecting minority groups. There's a lot of law that promotes inclusion, more inclusion and more diversity at workplace and in different places. There is no law prohibiting the veil in public schools and institutions. So the Islamophobia should be in another place, and it's not in institution, it's in the public space and public transport. So it's more about people than institutions in the UK.
So it's, but that's somewhat, well, I guess they're both very serious because they both affect the way in which we all live in that sense. Because,
Exactly.
you going to a public space, you want to feel safe and you want to feel like you can live out your everyday life. Like, you don't want to always have to be putting up a show. And the fact that Islamophobia in itself has a particular impact or effect in the sense that it can affect the way we behave, it's quite scary, What do you think?
I mean, in both cases, it is serious because the public space is concerned, is affected at the end of the day. So there is a real concern on how Muslims look in either at workplace or public institution or public areas like parks or public transport, or in any case, it's a very serious issue that affects people's lives.
Exactly. But yeah, thank you, Dr. Katwar Najib, for joining us today. We very appreciated your input into the discussion. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next guest that we're going to be joined by is Homa Wilson. Homa is a partner at Hodge Jones and Allen Solicitors, sorry about that. She specialises in employment law with a particular focus on high value and complex discrimination claims. But first things first, I want to say to any of you guys listening out there, if you've ever experienced Islamophobia in any way and you want to share that experience or you want to discuss it or join in on the discussion, do call in on 01582 481822 or text in on 0779 481822. And we're also live on Facebook, so you can comment underneath our Facebook live stream. But yeah, we are joined by Homa Wilson today. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So I guess first things first, like we've asked everyone else. Actually, I just want to ask first, Islamophobia in the workplace, is it a very common thing in that sense?
Well, I think, Farah, there's certainly the research suggests that it is. And there have been a couple of relatively recent reports into this area, including there was one in 2017 and there was a 2016 report by the Women and Equality Select Committee, which really did sort of identify that Muslim women in particular are at a disadvantage in the workplace, both in securing work and once they're in work in terms of the opportunities available to them, promotions and pay. And, I've been doing this for over 13 years now, and it is, and as you said, I specialise in discrimination, so perhaps I see things when they get to their very worst for people. But certainly I have seen an increase in Muslims complaining of unfair treatment, discrimination on grounds of their religion within the workplace.
So how would you say, Muslims in general should go around tackling this if they feel that they have been discriminated against or they have experienced Islamophobia? What do you think, on a personal level, individual level, but also as a society, what can we do in order to sort of
mitigate this problem?
Yeah.
I think sort of a lawyer, with my lawyer's hat on, the answer would be the law is there to protect people, and under the Equalities Act, it is unlawful for an employer to discriminate against someone on grounds of their religion. So if you are being treated unfairly, you don't get a job because you wear a headscarf, or you're not being promoted, then in theory the law is there to protect you. And the first step, I normally advise clients, the first sort of step, if you've got a complaint against your employer, is to put it in writing, is to raise a grievance, and your employer would be obliged to investigate that complaint. And the kind of things you're sort of getting down on paper is, what the examples of unfair treatment are, why you think you've been discriminated against, point to any witnesses, what was said, and the employer is obliged to then investigate that. And ultimately, as I said, it is unlawful. So you could enforce your rights in the employment tribunal. So your claim would be against the organisation, but if there have been colleagues who've made sort of remarks about you or discriminated against you, used sort of discriminatory language, you could also bring a claim against them, and the employer would be vicariously liable for anything said or done by them. I think the problem is that a lot of people, and this isn't just in respect of Muslims, when people are facing discrimination within the workplace, it's very difficult for them to even sort of admit to themselves that the unfair treatment might be on grounds of whatever it is, religion or race, and because it's less overt. I have
definitely
had cases where people have been called terrorists. They've been asked about their views on ISIS, persistently, but most of the time it's sort of unconscious bias. So you've got an interview panel and they see a hijabi, and I wear a hijab, so I've had sort of similar experiences myself, and they may not get the role, and they may be the best candidate for the role because the employer consciously or unconsciously doesn't see them as fitting into their organisation. And it's very difficult to sort of tackle that because there's very little that you can do. The onus is on organisations to sort of educate their own staff and to even recognise unconscious bias, to sort of be able to. The first step is to recognising for organisations when they're interviewing, when they're promoting, the way that they recruit as well, is to sort of make their organisation more sort of open and friendly at those sort of various stages. So recruitment, promotion, etc.
I have a question for you. So, you talk about how we should recognise when we are facing Islamophobia. But, for example, I'm an undergrad, and if when I'm applying for roles and I eventually get into the workplace, and I have colleagues that say remarks that make me uncomfortable, and it leans towards Islamophobic because I feel they are attacking my religion, but it's in a very casual and covert way. How would I take the next step in trying to report this? Because I would feel that they said it in a casual conversation and everyone was laughing and it was deemed as a joke. I think that's where it's a very blurry line, because
that type of situation is quite common though, isn't it?
It's very common. And so, we talk about how, institutionally they should recognize the unconscious bias, but I think it's also educating ourselves, knowing what is unacceptable and identifying whether we are a victim of Islamophobia. And how would you say we would recognize that?
I mean, the example that you gave sounds like it would be quite sort of overt examples of discrimination, and unfortunately those are the examples that I see a lot. So it's where colleagues make remarks and they try and pass it off as sort of quote unquote banter. Actually, the law deals with that quite sort of firmly, because that would amount to discrimination, and the sort of within the umbrella of discrimination is something called harassment. So if someone makes remarks, does something or says something which has the intention of creating a hostile, intimidating environment, and even if it doesn't have the intention, creates a hostile interface environment, which is exactly what you've described. I mean, if other people are laughing, people have said things and they're sort of, your religion is being targeted, I think absolutely that would be a classic example of harassment under the Equality Act, and it is unlawful. And the first step is definitely to raise that in writing with the employer and to say, look, this needs to be investigated, this is unacceptable, and the employer should then interview that person, interview the witnesses, and take appropriate action. Because, when I sort of said that it's not exactly rare, but it's not that common to see overt examples of discrimination within the workplace. So the examples that you gave, actually, they are they're not that common. The common examples are where someone is sidelined, they're treated differently. So, for example, if they make a request for annual leave, or they ask colleagues to cover for them when they're on holiday, or whatever it may be, employer or their line managers are less likely to sort of show them flexibility compared to colleagues who, for example, a non-Muslim colleague, for example. And those are the examples where it's more difficult, because someone's left thinking, well, is it just me, or is it because I'm a Muslim? Now, either way, if you've got a concern that you might be subjected to sort of different treatment, or you're being bullied, and those examples of being sidelined, left out of team lunches, for example, not get invited when other team members are invited to various sort of outings, let's say, those might not be overtly sort of on grounds of your religion, but that kind of builds up a picture, and that is still something that would potentially amount to bullying within the workplace. And most employers have policies on bullying, and if you sort of got a copy of that policy from HR, that should set out quite clearly what you should do in that instance. And it's usually, we usually identify that you put your complaint in writing, this is who you send it to, what then happens. So within the next number of days, they'll investigate it, they'll hold a meeting with you, they'll report back to you. So those are the kind of steps that people can take if they're sort of facing these kind of problems in the workplace.
You talk about how it's really important to take that forward, and once it's going to be investigated, one fear I would have, if I reported this, would it inhibit my opportunities climbing the ladder in the workplace? And what advice would you give to people like me that are fearful to report such incidents because they don't want to be categorized as a person that's reported Islamophobia against an institution that is well recognized, well reputed? I
suppose the reality is that there is always that risk, but then what's the upshot of that? The upshot is we kind of are so crippled by fear we do nothing, and nothing moves forward. I suppose there's got to be there's got to be some kind of confidence that the employer wants to do the right thing. So all these tens of thousands of pounds that they spend getting policies on, anti-bullying policies on sexual harassment in the workplace, there's got to be some confidence that actually they're not just doing that to pay lip service to those, anti-discrimination law. They actually want to improve the workplace, because if you've got a sensible organisation, they will see that it's in their interest to tackle these things. And actually what you're doing in raising the grievance is you're not going public with it. You're going to your employer, and you're in the hope that your employer will deal with it in confidence and maintain, deal with it in a sensitive way and confidentially. And it's in the employer's interest to deal with it appropriately, promptly, and to take the necessary action against the aggressor. So the hope is that companies are sort of aware that doing the right thing is in their own interest as well as the employee's interest.
Yeah.
I think that summarised it very well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one question I would have is that I read an article that you've written in the past post. I think it was in the 1st of November 2018, titled Islamophobia in the Workplace. In that article, you talk about a 65% rise in religious hate crimes since 2016. So in terms of, well, I guess firstly, how much of that is perhaps in the workplace? But not only that, where do you think this sort of rise in hate crime is rooted, I guess?
I think there was a significant sort of rise after the Brexit vote, and also I think, you know, not just against Muslims, just in terms of
in general
xenophobia generally, and just across the country. So we're not just talking about in the workplace, but I think if there has been such a huge spike in race crimes in a relatively short period, then it would be naive to assume that it doesn't also permeate the workplace, because those people, if those prejudices come out in people, they are going to come out inside work as well as outside of work. So I think the Brexit vote definitely had something to do with it. You know, there's been, for the past few years, there's been an increase in the far right and anti-Muslim rhetoric by mainstream politicians as well. You know, you've only got to sort of think about the comments that Boris Johnson has made. And that just doesn't help, because when people see Muslims as the other, it makes it very easy to discriminate against them, unfortunately. And I think that is what's been happening over the past few years.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But yeah, thank you very much, Homa, for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
It's very insightful, especially for those who are in the workplace and those who are, like for us, undergrads that are going to be working very soon. Knowing our rights and knowing how to take the steps forward to ensure that, you know, we're protected and we're not becoming victims of Islamophobia.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's such an important point, because if I could just end on a positive note, having spoken about really grim statistics, I think, you know, as Muslims, we have a lot to contribute, and if we sort of focus on the negatives, then we really sort of almost elect ourselves out, you know, we take ourselves out of the race. And I think, you know, things are improving, and they can only improve if we are in the race and we contribute, and we're seen as contributing. So contributing to the debate, contributing to sort of society generally and the workplace. So thank you for having this discussion. I think it's very useful.
Thank you, Homa.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
So yeah, that was extremely insightful.
Yeah, she talks about how, and I like how she ended it, because it's about representation. We need to infiltrate the sectors to make sure that our voices are heard, and, you know, people have stereotypes and prejudices because they don't know us, and they hear about us, but they don't have that first-hand experience. And I think it's really important, as she said, is to infiltrate those sectors and contribute to those debates and be contributors.
And have the debates, because I feel like loads of people are very quick to shy away from discussion. That's a very general statement, but I mean it's very easy to not even talk about the problem. But the point is if there is a problem there, then we should talk about it. And especially with things like this, I think a somewhat, how do I say it, on a more one-to-one, I guess, individual basis, if you're in a workplace and you're facing Islamophobia, like Mariam said, that actually a lot of Islamophobia comes from the fact that people have stereotypes. They haven't really interacted with Muslims personally before. And I guess in that sense, it could also be up to us to sort of change that perception. And it's a less direct way of tackling the issue. But again, you know, everything comes down to sort of misunderstandings, I guess, in that sense. And yeah, the point of the matter is that if you are facing discrimination in the workplace, there are pathways open to you to go down, and we sort of discussed a few of those in the show. I hope they were helpful.
I think it's really important to recognise that you could be a victim of Islamophobia, because, you know, as we discussed, there's covert and overt types of Islamophobia, and I think we are quite reluctant to voice those incidents that happen to us, or those interactions. And, you know, personally for me, you know, it'll be shocking because some of the things that was mentioned on the show, and I took it very casually and I experienced it myself. And it just sheds light on how we become so tolerant to unacceptable behavior because we don't know, and we don't know how to identify that this is wrong.
Yeah, I agree. And the point being made that we don't realise how serious it actually is, because the research, a lot of the research done by Dr. Katwar Najib, who joined us on the show, she was talking about the fact that it can affect us and the way we behave and the way we live. That's
astonishing.
Fair. That's not acceptable.
And it's what she said was how French Muslims have to perform in a certain way because they want to be accepted.
Or some of them feel
of them feel that they can't work or go in the private sector or public space because they are going to be attacked or they're going to be verbally abused.
Well, I think in general, it makes sense. Like if you feel like you're going to be in danger, then you're going to take the appropriate steps. But the point is why
should we feel in danger
that way? For
identity.
Exactly. And that's another aspect. And I guess that's the reason why that having a specific definition for Islamophobia that takes into account all these different aspects and the ways it can manifest is so important for it to be broad, because the point is it can come in discrete ways, it can come in more open ways, but there's so many different ways.
And I think that what I would say coming through the end of the show is that it's really important to educate yourself in knowing that you could be vulnerable and you could become a victim of Islamophobia, and you shouldn't shy away from reporting it.
But even if you're not Muslim as well.
And even if you're not Muslims. And also protect each other. I think we need to broaden ourselves. It's not just Muslims that are facing these hate crimes. It's people that are perceived as Muslims. And I think we need to branch out to those people as well.
Exactly. But yeah, thank you very much for listening, and thanks to all our guests for joining us, and we'll join you next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Why not tune in to our live stream at inspirefm.org and follow and subscribe to our social media platforms at Inspire FM Luton.